So the learning objectives on today's lesson, we are going to discuss the three art forms that belongs to fine arts, namely painting, sculpture, and architecture. You will be able to familiarize yourself with the different fine arts together with their artists. And also, we are going to classify and compare the forms of fine arts. So this is our subject, contemporary Philippine arts from the region. So when we say contemporary arts, this is called as the art of today. So on its most basic sense, the term contemporary arts refers to arts namely painting, sculpture, photography, performance, and even video art that is produced today. So they usually reflect on our modern society using techniques and materials such as videos and the use of technology. So as an example of our contemporary arts, we have here a painting created by our national artist Abdul Mari Imau entitled The Muslim in the Philippines. So on our example, you can see there different things and symbols that represents our country. So, in terms of contemporary art, it allows an individual a means of personal expression. Well, anyone can express themselves in a way that will be safely observable with other people. The artist in contemporary fine arts creates a dialogue or a narration through the images or the shapes that they create. When the viewer, us as the viewer, engage with the piece or engage with the art, they engage with the artist's dialogue. Okay? So fine arts. So fine arts is a visual art. When we say visual art, these are the arts that meet our eye and evoke an emotion through expression of skills and imagination. This is considered to be created primarily for its aesthetic or the what we call beauty, and sometimes even intellectual purposes. It is always judged for its beauty and meaningfulness, specifically painting to sculpture and architecture. So that is fine arts. So in fine arts, this means that the artist is required to be a master in the use of medium, technique, and craftsmanship. When we say material or medium, this is the physical element of art. Okay, so these are simply the materials that the artist used to create their art. Whatever a piece of art is made out of its medium. So in art class, the art materials or the artist supplies used to create a work of art. So basically, it's whatever you use to make a mark upon a surface. So example of medium, we have the paints, oil, brush, could also use stones, and of course colors. We call that as the material or the medium. When we say technique, it is the artist's personal way of using the material. So technique can be viewed as the foundation of all or any art activities. Always remember that knowing your craft or your art and knowing the materials of your chosen medium is important in being able to truly rationalize the often impulsive act of conveying ideas. As an example of technique, we have on the first picture, the large picture, we call that as the graffiti. So graffiti, it involves an authorized marking of public space by an individual. So even if in the common image of a graffiti, it is a spray painted on a wall by a member of a street gang, there are some graffiti that are non-gang related. So it can be understood as an antisocial in order to gain attention but it can also be understood as an expressive art form. Next, we have the craftsmanship. When we say craftsmanship in art, it means a skill exhibited by a person for creating an artistic work with hands. So, class, the work may be done using tools or by not using it. It is actually the quality which we may admire. So, such category of artistic works which exhibits one's skill in artistry may be termed as artistic craftsmanship. Artistic works such as painting, carving, sculpting are performed using hands or without tools. So such skills may be categorized as the craftsmanship. Example, you're using your hands in painting. If you are an expert in that field or you have mastered that kind of skill, that is what we called the craftsmanship. So craftsmanship with the quality that comes from creating your passion, care, and of course attention to every details of your artwork. Right? So these are the three art forms that we are going to discuss. So in terms of fine arts, we have painting, sculpture, and architecture. So as an example of painting, we have there on the bottom picture, we call that as the strong and beautiful. This was created by Ronald Ventura, a contemporary Filipino artist known for his dynamic melding of realism, cartoons, and even graffiti. So if you can notice, he always use or sometimes use scenes from its chaotic disarray. Ventura calls from science fiction, Western history, and Asian mythology. On the right picture, that is what we call the Sari Manok created by Abdul Mari Imal. That is an example of sculpture. He uses the Sari Manok as a motif for some of his artworks, which actually help popularize the creature. The Sari Manok class is the legendary bird of the Maranao people from the Mindanao. On the left picture, we have there as an example of our architecture what we call the Philippine Arena. So the Philippine Arena is the world's largest indoor arena. It is a multi-purpose indoor arena with a maximum seating capacity of 55,000 at Ciudad de Victoria in Bulacan. Okay? So those are just some of the painting, sculpture, and architecture that we have here in the Philippines na talaga namang pinagmamalaki natin being a Filipino. Now, let's discuss them one by one. First, we have the painting. So painting is the most popular among the fine arts because almost any theme can be applied. So the painters, through the use of different colors, they can express themselves without the use of words. Just like our example, that is a painting created by Andres Barrio Quinto. Andres Barrio Quinto is a multi-awarded Filipino artist, and his iconic and surreal painting style had made him successful in the local and international art scenes. Okay? So class, in our lesson painting, the artist is actually using different styles based on their stylistic tendencies. So we call them as the style of object accuracy, the style of formal order, the style of emotion, and the style of fantasy. When we say the style of object accuracy, this means that the painting is an accurate depiction of physical object or people. Okay? So it involves creating an impression of reality through a selective use of visual facts. So that is an example of style of object accuracy. On our left picture, okay, so the one who created this type of painting is Sean Yoro. So if you can notice on his painting, it has an impression of reality, and actually the artist here imitates an appearance to convey a moving drama about human life. Okay? So some artists combine their representational skill to create a psychological impact, and their representation becomes an interpretation of reality. Okay? So if you can notice, parang nagiging totoo siya. Okay? So here, he used large bodies of water for his painting, and actually his love of nature flourished and later becomes an artistic talent. So that is what we call the style of object accuracy. So there is an impression of reality. Next, we have the style of formal order. For the style of formal order, it is expressed with stability in their creative work. So in general, this type of style works with the characteristic of order in measure, proportion, mathematical relationship, balance, and harmony. As an example of our formal order, we have there on the left picture. This one was created by Romeo Gutierrez, one family. So notice on the style of formal order, it usually use balance in and harmony on its colors and the shapes that they are using. So, but it doesn't mean that the works can't be realistic, okay? So looking to some degree, but the most important aspect of this work would be the sense of order or an ideal. So we call that as the style of formal order. So next we have, this is one of my favorite style in terms of painting, the style of emotion. The emotions may refer to those felt or experienced by the artist or those experienced by the viewer. Okay? So there are several sources for these emotions. Thematic and subject matter sources as well as organizational or design sources. So if you can notice, in terms of this style, they are using emotion. Just like on our example, Jovito Andres, the mother and the child. So on this type of painting, it is the love for the mother to her child and the love for the child to his mother that they are trying to tell us in terms of their emotion. Okay? So it could also be about anxiety, despair, disappointment, or even bitterness, just like on the next example. So all of these are the what we call the style of emotion. What matter here is not the accuracy or the measured expression of order, but the communication of emotion, which takes precedence over everything else. So we call it as the style of emotion. So next we have the style of fantasy. So this one is different. So this type of style, it exhibit a logic based on dreams, utopian hopes, sometimes even speculative vision, and it can be based on myth, fairy tales, folk stories, magic, hybrid man-animal creature, just like in the example. Okay? So this time, it's not using any impression of reality, but to what we call fantasy art. It originates in both logical and irrational mental process. It presents no common set of visual qualities. So, hindi siya makatotohanan, but through the painting, nagkakaroon sila ng buhay. So, you can also use, for example, mga hybrid man-animal creature like unicorns, mga hindi totoong nakikita. Okay, so we call them as the style of fantasy. So the next art form that we're going to discuss is the sculpture. Sculpture is the branch of visual arts that operates in three dimension. So there are different processes that we might use such as carving, modeling, and even welding. So one of the famous sculpture here in the Philippines is the Oblation, designed and created by Guillermo Tolentino. The Oblation is a concrete statue by Filipino artist Guillermo Tolentino, which serves as the iconic symbol of the University of the Philippines. It depicts a man facing upward with arms outstretched, symbolizing selfless offering of oneself to his country. So these are the sculptural process that you might use. Okay, so you can use different process using these materials. These are the stone, the wood, the terracotta or the clay, the metal, the wax, and the resin. To further discuss this sculptural process, let's proceed to the next slide. The first sculptural process or material is the what we call the stone. Stone sculpture is an object made of stone which has been shaped usually by carving, pwede rin ina-assemble to form a visually interesting 3D shape or three-dimensional shape. Glass stone is more durable than most alternative materials, making it especially important in architectural sculpture on the outside building. As an example of stone sculpture, we have the Bahay na Bato in Luna, La Union. This is now one of the most visited tourist destination by both local and foreign tourists in the region. Next, we have the wood sculpture. Wood sculpture or carving is a form of woodworking by means of cutting tool or the knife in one hand or a chisel by two hands, resulting in a wooden figure or figurine. So this is an example of wood sculpture created by Jose Alcantara the sabong. However, there is this disadvantages in using this kind of wood sculpture. Especially kapag nabasa siya, pwede siyang madaling makrack. Okay? But if we kept this in a place na walang tubig, na hindi mababasa, maganda siyang pang-design sa bahay natin. Okay? Wood sculpture. Next, we have the terracotta or the clay. Class terracotta is a brownish red clay that had been baked and it is used for making things such as flower pots, small statues, and even as tiles. So as an example of terracotta or clay, we have here created by Geoffrey Pepot and Atienza. He is from Atimonan. He provides art for children's books through the what he called the 3D illustration. It is a complex process that begins with clay figures and ends with digital images. That is what we call the terracotta or the clay. Next, we have the metal sculpture. So, any artwork class that is crafted from the ores of the earth, including, for example, silver, lead, tin, gold, pwede din bronze, and iron, they are all called as metal sculpture. Okay? So, this is an example of metal sculpture created by Jinggoy Buensuceso. Another example of metal sculpture, we have the bronze. It is the most popular metal for cast metal sculpture. A cast bronze sculpture is often simply called as the bronze. It can be used for statues by single or in groups or even in some figurines. Pwede rin siyang gamitin. Example of bronze, we have the MacArthur Leyte Landing Memorial National Park. It is a protected area of the Philippines that commemorates the historic landing of General Douglas MacArthur in Leyte Gulf at the start of the campaign to recapture and liberate the Philippines from Japanese occupation on October 20, 1944. So that is an example of bronze sculpture. Next, we have the wax. Okay, it could be used for sculpture, although at times it is not permanent and it can easily be damaged, lalo na kapag na-expose sa heat. Okay, so we have example of wax there. The first on the top picture, created by Drew Panes. It is a purely handcrafted in the Visayas region. This piece of candle uses high grade of wax and colorants to create a colorful feather patterns. On the bottom picture, we call that as the most famous modern waxwork exhibition that is of Madame Tussauds, where the technology of animatronics brings the wax figures to life. The one holding the crown is the wax figure. Yung katabi niya is the real Miss Pia Alonso Wirchbach, our Miss Universe 2015. So, that example is for abroad. Okay? So, yung nasa taas, yan ay gawang Pinoy. So next we have the resin. Class A resin is a thick, sticky substance that is produced by some trees and that becomes yellow and hard after it is collected, or any of various similar substances produced by chemical process for industry is called the resin. Example of resin we have there, this was created by Charlie Coe, entitled Ai Weiwei. Okay, so our Ai Weiwei is a real person. Ai Weiwei is a Chinese contemporary artist known for his political activism. Okay, so he stands for human rights, and Charlie Coe actually sees this Ai Weiwei as an icon for his radical thinking. In his painting or even in sculpture, he depicts the Chinese artist as a brave and courageous individual. Okay? So we have discussed the different sculptural process. The first one was the stone, followed by the wood, the terracotta, the metal, the bronze, the wax, and the resin. If you have any question, you can put that on our chat box and I will read it to the class and we will answer. Okay? So the next and the last art form that we're going to discuss is the architecture. Architecture is in the fields of science and art. As an art, it is its function and purpose, the space that it will occupy, and the people who will occupy it determine its creative design. Architecture is the art and science of the design of different structures, such as buildings, of houses, places of worship, and sometimes even in office buildings. Architecture is an art form that reflects how we represent ourselves across the Earth's landscape. As an example of architecture here in the Philippines, we have there the Cultural Center of the Philippines, designed by Leandro Locsin. Leandro Locsin is an architect, an interior designer. He is also an artist. He was determined to reconfigure Western and architectural mores for a Filipino audience. Okay, so CCP, or Cultural Center of the Philippines, is a collection of 5 buildings that demonstrate the architect's drive to find a vernacular form of modernist architecture. In terms of architecture, we have different factors to consider to have a building constructed. Number one would be the site. Number two would be the climate, followed by the materials, the clients, the cost, the building codes, and of course, the craftsmanship. Okay? So in terms of materials in architecture, when we say classic materials, these are the wood, the stone, and the brick. We also have the modern materials in architecture. This includes the cast iron, the structural steel, and the reinforced concrete. So this is the cast iron. Going to highlight them. Okay, so this is the cast iron. Okay. So in cast iron, this is a set of steel skeleton construction and architecture. This enables the construction of tall buildings without having to use the thick walls. We also have the structural steel on the middle picture. So this is the structural steel. Okay, so structural steels used advanced architectural through tubular, extruded, and corrugated steel products. Since it has high tensile strength, rolled steel plate beams are designed in shapes which takes advantage of the strength while keeping the weight and the cost to a minimum. And we also have the reinforced concrete. So this is the reinforced concrete, or the what we call the ferro concrete. this is more efficient than other like piers or arc. For example, joints in classical structures are the weakest points, and the curve of ferroconcrete eliminates those joints. Okay, so those are just some of the materials that we use for architecture. Next, we also have the doors, the windows, and the walls. Doors class can be made out of wood, glass, or metal, or pwede din combination. Wooden doors, pwede siyang i-carve with any design. Just remember that the color and the design of the door should always match the motif or style of the interior. Okay? So the letter A picture is the what we call the Metro Manila Cathedral main door. The letter B picture is the Manila Cathedral stained glass windows depicting the life of Christ. And for letter C picture, we have the Cebu, the Henry Hotel lobby. Next, we have the structural devices. When we say structural devices, they are used to enclose space in architecture. Well, material are important because they determine how structural devices operates. Okay, so these are the example of structural devices. Letter A picture is the post and lintel. Letter B is the cantilever. Letter C is the truss system. D is the arc. E is the dome. And F is the shell structure. To further discuss the structural devices, let's proceed to the next slide. When we say post and lintel, it is consists of two vertical supports and bridged by a horizontal beam. So this will serve as the post, the one that I will highlight on yellow. So these are the posts, and this will be the lintel. Okay, so that is the lintel, post and lintel. It is used for large openings that allows for wide windows. Pwede rin siya para magkaroon ng good interior ventilation. And of course, para magkaroon din ng mga displays. Okay? Display possibilities. So it has able to have irregular spacing of posts and partition, which creates interchangeable cubicle spaces. So this example is in Bohol, the Blue Water Resort, Panglao. Next, we have the cantilever. Cantilever is a horizontal extension of a beam or a slab into space beyond its supporting post. So this is the cantilever. Yan. The one that is highlighted in yellow. Okay, so it's free and unsupported below. And the point where it rests on its post acts like a fulcrum or a lever. The cantilever relies on the resistance of breaking its material and the secure fastening of its internal end. So example of cantilever is in Bataan, the staircase in a house in Anvaya Cove. Next, we have the truss system. Truss system or truss construction is used where great spaces must be used with few or no interior support. So this is an example of the truss system. Okay, so that is the truss system. This device is essential for bridges, theaters, convention halls, pwede rin gymnasiums, and even sa mga assembly halls. Okay? So, wood and metal ang pwedeng gamitin dito because they have high tensile strength for their weight, and truss relies heavily on its tension. Next, we have the arc, a curved part of a structure that is over an opening and that supports a wall or other weight above the opening. So, this is the arc. Ayan. The one highlighted in yellow. Okay, so that is what we call the arc. So, modern arc is much stronger. That brick or stone are used like for concrete, steel, or laminated wood. So this example is in Metro Manila, the Power Plant Mall. So next structural devices are the dome and the shell structure. So class, the dome, throughout the history, ginagamit ito or binibuild as a symbol of spiritual aspiration, political power, and even the civic pride. So a dome is a large round roof or ceiling that is shaped like a half ball. Okay, so this is from Metro Manila, the Church of Holy Spirit in UP, Diliman. Next, we have the shell structure. So this use reinforced concrete and superior mathematical tools for calculating stresses and the strength of material. So these are economical because they can enclose a big area of space with a minimum of material. So this is the interior and this is the exterior of a shell structure, the Philippine Arena, owned by the Iglesia ni Cristo, the large indoor arena in the whole world. Okay, so those are the structural devices that we have discussed. So we have the post and lintel, the cantilever, the truss system, and the arc. We also have the dome and the shell structure. Next is the style of architecture. When we say style in architecture, it is characterized by different features that makes a building or other structures notable or historically identifiable. Okay, these examples are what we call contemporary architecture. It cuts away from the modern architecture of the late 20th century by including eco-friendly features, just like on our example. Okay. So number one, we have the biomorphic architecture. It is very easy to distinguish because of its shapes inspired by living organism. We call that as the biomorphic. So this example is in Metro Manila, the St. Andrew the Apostle Church in Makati. We call them as the biomorphic architecture. Next, we have the environment-friendly architecture. In terms of environment-friendly architecture, napakarami niyan dito sa Philippines, okay? So, the architects who use this kind of architecture, they consider the connection between outdoor landscape and the indoor environment. Instead, natanggalin yung mga trees, buhusan ng semento yung mga river flow, ang architect, nagde-design sila sa mga natural elements and they make them part of the everyday life at ini-integrate nila to para sa isang napakagandang structure. We call that as environment-friendly architecture. Next, we have the third one is the skyscrapers. So in Manila, the number of skyscrapers are growing that it serves as residences and business offices. Generally, ang skyscraper sa Manila, ang first floor, may mga lobby spaces, commercial spaces. Yung ibang floor naman, ginagamit parang parking, and the lowest is usually the what we call the basement. So this is an example of our skyscrapers, the Makati skyline. Okay, so these are the summarization of some of our discussion. So we have discussed the three art forms that belongs to fine arts, namely the painting, sculpture, and architecture. So contemporary arts is the what we call the art of today. Fine arts, this means that the artist is required to be a master in the use of medium, in technique, and craftsmanship. These are the supplementary links to our videos and readings. Okay, and these are the references. So thank you for participating in our virtual class for our second session. So always remember that life is art. Live yours in color. So I am your online learning coordinator in the subject Contemporary Philippine Arts in the region, or the CPAR 2122. Thank you for participating and keep safe, everyone.